Ah, look who's still standing here. Hello to the quiet storms, the soft-spoken earthquakes, the gentle souls with titanium spines hidden behind warm smiles. Yes, you. They really thought they had you figured out, didn't they? They saw the softness in your eyes and mistook it for surrender. They heard the patience in your voice and labeled it compliance. They felt the warmth in your presence and assumed it meant access, unlimited access, permanent access, consequence, free access. They studied your kindness the way opportunists study open doors. They examined your generosity like architects, examining weak foundations. They saw compassion and translated it into vulnerability weak. Naive, easy to influence, easy to guilt, easy to bend. That was their first miscalculation. Because what they never understood, what their worldview didn't have space for, is that your kindness was never an absence of strength. It was strength under control. You weren't gentle because you lacked an edge. You were gentle because you had one and chose not to use it. You weren't patient because you were confused. You were patient because you were aware. You saw the manipulation. You saw the subtle tests. You saw the attempts to provoke, to corner, to elicit reaction. You saw it all. And instead of exploding, you breathed. That's what unsettled them. They expected fire. They got composure. They expected outrage. They got stillness. They expected drama. They got distance. They wanted a villain arc. They wanted you to snap so they could point and say, "See, we knew it." They wanted proof that your softness was fake, that your kindness was a mask hiding instability. But you never gave them that performance. You remained consistent, and consistency from someone they underestimated. That broke their internal model of power. Because their idea of power was loud, reactive, dominating, yours was quiet, regulated, self-contained. They tried pushing your buttons. Nothing. They tried guilt. Nothing. They tried emotional chaos, and you stood there like a calm shoreline while their waves exhausted themselves. They couldn't compute it. How could someone be this kind and this immovable at the same time? How could someone be this gentle and this firm? That contradiction, that beautiful contradiction, destabilized everything they thought they knew about you. They mistook your willingness to understand them as inability to see them. But you saw them clearly. You saw the patterns, the cycles, the repeated testing of boundaries, the subtle disrespect disguised as jokes, the entitlement wrapped in affection. You saw it. You just didn't react to it the way they wanted. And that is where the shift began. Because while they were busy trying to trigger you, you were observing them. Not to gather ammunition, not to prepare revenge, but to gather clarity. You noticed who only showed up when they needed something. You noticed who got uncomfortable when you said no. You noticed who preferred your exhaustion over your evolution. Every interaction became information. Every test became confirmation. And still, you remained kind. That's what makes this story so powerful. You didn't change your nature in response to their behavior. You refined your boundaries. There's a difference. They expected you to harden. Instead, you sharpened your discernment. They expected you to attack. Instead, you disengaged. They expected you to beg for understanding. Instead, you stopped explaining. That's silence. That's when their system started glitching. Because silence from someone who used to over-explain, that feels like an earthquake to people who relied on your emotional labor. When you stopped justifying yourself, when you stopped offering long paragraphs to clarify your intentions, when you stopped managing their feelings for them, they panicked. Not loudly at first, quietly in private conversations, in confused reflections, in subtle attempts to regain control of the dynamic. What happened to you? You've changed. You're different now. Yes, you changed. but not in the way they're implying. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You didn't become harsh. You became honest. You didn't become cruel. You became unavailable for disrespect. And to someone who benefited from your lack of boundaries, that feels like loss. That feels like rejection. That feels like being shut out of a room they once had keys to. But here's the truth they struggle with. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped holding it open. You stopped rebuilding conversations they kept tearing down. You stopped smoothing over tension they kept creating. You stopped absorbing emotions that were never yours to carry. And that withdrawal, that quiet, calm withdrawal, felt devastating to them. Not because you attacked, but because you stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own behavior. That's the part no one talks about. When a gentle person leaves, they don't leave chaos behind. They leave absence. Absence has a way of teaching lessons presence never could. They're feeling it now. The space where your patience used to be, the silence where your reassurance once lived, the emptiness where your steady emotional presence used to stabilize the room. They didn't notice how much you were carrying until you set it down. They didn't realize how much you were holding together until you stopped. And now they sit with that cognitive dissonance. How could someone so kind walk away so firmly? Because kindness and boundaries are not opposites. They are partners. You didn't stop caring. You stopped self-betraying. You didn't withdraw love. You withdrew access. You didn't destroy anything. You refused to keep rebuilding something that required your exhaustion to survive. And that realization, that they misjudged strength as weakness, is humbling. It's uncomfortable. It forces reflection, because now they have to confront something difficult. You were never powerless. You were restrained. You were never naive. You were observant. You were never dependent. You were generous, and generosity is not obligation. Here's what truly unsettles them. They can't label you the villain. You didn't explode. You didn't insult. You didn't humiliate. You didn't expose. You simply stepped back calmly, clearly, completely. And now they're left with their own words, their own behavior, their own patterns, with no distraction, no emotional reaction to bounce off of, no argument to justify themselves against. Just quiet. And in that quiet, reflection gets louder. They replay moments. Times you chose patience. Times you offered grace. Times you swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. They start seeing those moments differently now. Not as weakness, as strength. Because it takes enormous strength to remain soft in a world that constantly tests your edges. It takes discipline to respond gently when provoked. It takes maturity to walk away without tearing everything down on your way out. That's what you did. You didn't storm out. You didn't burn bridges. You simply stopped crossing them. And that shift, that subtle but irreversible shift, changed the entire dynamic. Now, they're experiencing something they didn't expect. Comparison, every own new feels different, less patient, less understanding, less steady. Because what you offered wasn't common. It wasn't basic kindness. It was regulated presence. It was emotional intelligence. It was someone strong enough to choose gentleness. And that combination, it's rare. They see it now too late. But clarity often arrives after access expires. You didn't crash their world. You let their assumptions collapse. You didn't destroy their narrative. You stopped participating in it. You didn't fight for dominance. You mastered yourself. And that mastery, that internal steadiness, is what remains. Not anger, not revenge, not chaos, just you. Still standing, still kind, still grounded, but no longer available for dynamics that require your diminishment. That's the real power. And the beautiful thing, you're not done evolving. You're not finished growing. This isn't the end of your strength. It's the stabilization of it. You're learning how to be soft without being accessible to harm. How to be loving without being self-sacrificing. How to be gentle without being taken for granted. And as you continue refining that balance, as you continue choosing peace over performance, as you continue building boundaries that feel like self-respect instead of walls, the ground beneath you doesn't shake anymore. It stabilizes and you remain. Not louder, not harsher, not colder, just clearer. And that clarity is still unfolding. Because what you've stepped into now isn't just a boundary phase. It isn't just a temporary reaction to being misunderstood. It's a recalibration of your entire internal structure. You're not reacting anymore. You're responding. You're not absorbing anymore. You're filtering. You're not overextending anymore. You're evaluating. And that shift, subtle on the outside, seismic on the inside, changes everything. The people who once relied on your automatic yes are now meeting your thoughtful pause. The ones who expected emotional access without responsibility are now encountering a door that requires accountability to open. The ones who were comfortable with your endless patience are now adjusting to your precise limits. And here's what's fascinating. You didn't become rigid. You became selective. There's a difference. Rigid is closed. Selective is aware. You still love deeply. You still care intensely. You still offer warmth, but now it flows toward reciprocity, not toward depletion. That's what they're noticing. Not cruelty, not coldness, not revenge. They're noticing the absence of automatic accommodation. They're noticing that you no longer rush to repair what you didn't break, that you no longer volunteer to manage emotional chaos that isn't yours, that you no longer shrink so others can feel taller. And for people who grew accustomed to your flexibility, your evolution feels like resistance. It feels like distance. It feels like something they can't quite name. But what it actually is self-regulation. You've regulated your nervous system. You've stopped chasing validation. You've stopped reacting from old wounds. You've started responding from awareness. And that level of groundedness can be confronting. Because when someone stands calmly in their truth, it removes the friction others relied on to justify their behavior. They can't call you dramatic. You're quiet. They can't call you unstable. You're steady. They can't call you cruel. You're measured. So what's left? Projection begins to collapse. And projection, collapsing, feels uncomfortable. It creates cognitive dissonance. They have to reconcile two realities at once: the version of you they labeled, and the version of you standing calmly in front of them. And those two don't match anymore. You didn't retaliate. You recalibrated. You didn't attack their character. You protected your peace. You didn't expose them publicly. You disengaged privately. That's what makes it powerful, because it's not fueled by ego. It's fueled by alignment. You're not trying to win. You're trying to live in integrity. And integrity has a frequency that unsettles people who operate in performance. You're no longer performing patience. You're embodying boundaries. You're no longer pretending misunderstandings don't hurt. You're deciding which ones are worth clarifying and which ones deserve silence. And silence has become your most articulate language. Not passive silence, not avoidance, intentional silence. The kind that says, I see this clearly and I choose not to engage. That choice, that's sovereignty. You didn't become untouchable because you hardened. You became untouchable because you integrated. You faced your own shadow. You've acknowledged your own anger. You felt your own hurt. And instead of weaponizing it, you processed it. That's maturity. That's emotional evolution. You're no longer reacting from unhealed wounds. You're responding from integrated strength, and that creates stability. Now, when someone tests you, you don't feel the need to prove anything. When someone misunderstands you, you don't feel the need to correct everything. When someone distances themselves because they can't access you the way they used to, you don't chase. You let them interpret. You let them project you. Let them sit with their assumptions. Because you know something now, you know that clarity doesn't require applause. It requires consistency. And you're consistent. Not in pleasing, not in appeasing. In honoring yourself. That's why you're still standing. Not because you fought harder, but because you chose better boundaries, better energy management, better discernment, better self-respect. You're not here to dominate rooms. You're here to occupy them fully. Without apology, you're not here to silence others. You're here to stop silencing yourself. And that shift ripples outward. Some will feel inspired. Some will feel unsettled. Some will feel regret. But you feel centered. Because the chaos you once absorbed now stops at your boundary. The emotional weight you once carried now belongs to its rightful owners. And you walk lighter, not lighter because life is easier. Lighter because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours. And that's the quiet triumph. Not over anyone else. Over old patterns. Over self-betrayal. Over unconscious accommodation. You didn't change your nature. You refined it. You didn't abandon kindness. You anchored it in self-respect. You didn't stop loving. You stopped overextending love where it wasn't honored. And that balance, strength wrapped in softness, gentleness reinforced with steel. That's who you are becoming, still evolving, still deepening, still learning the difference between compassion and compliance. Still discovering how powerful peace really is. Because peace isn't passive. Peace is disciplined. Peace is chosen. Peace is maintained. And you are maintaining yours. So yes, you're still standing, but not the way you used to. Not as someone bracing for impact. Not as someone hoping to be understood. Not as someone trying to earn their place. You're standing as someone who knows they belong with or without validation. And that stance, that grounded, unshaken stance, it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not vengeful, it's steady. And steady things endure. And you are just getting steadier.